The Doomer Bloomer podcast is a community for the resurrection of good ideas. We profile the hero's journey in weekly episodes and teach people about the 10 pillars framework for success in life, business, and relationships. Our mission is to find and help all Doomer Bloomers with mental health issues, poverty mindset, lack of resources, and those left behind in this world. Tune in weekly with Will S. and occasionally John Wynn as we have deep conversations with guests about the hero's journey, clown world order, and the resurrection of good ideas. To help support our community, go to www.thedoomerbloomerpodcast.com/support to become a member today. And remember, we are the cure for COVID-19. Welcome back to the Doomer Bloomer podcast with Will S. We are talking about the hero's journey, the 10 pillars framework for success, life, and business and relationships. Specifically, health, wealth, and wisdom are the three main pillars. Today, we are talking with Seven Jacobs, all the way from London. He is what they call a social entrepreneur, has had his own struggles in life, especially his early years. And I invited him today to speak about his life, mental health issues, projects he's working on, and possibly how to become a doomer to bloomer in your own life. How are things going with you today, Seven?
I'm great, Will. Thank you so much for having me. Today's one of those really great days, and I hope to kind of bring that out in what we talk about today.
Nice. So you were speaking to me just before we turned the microphone on about your early childhood and your traumatic growings up in
Mm.
Los Angeles. If you would, I know we talk about the hero's journey. So, would you say that in Los Angeles was the start of your hero's journey and
Mm.
got you on the path that you're on today?
Interesting. I think without realizing it, the life that I had growing up, and I'll jump into that in just a minute, I guess, in some more detail. But it without realizing it, I think turned me into someone who didn't believe I was worth much of anything, right? So, and in doing so, set me on this journey that, unbeknownst to me, was going to have a lot of learning, was going to push me a lot, and eventually kind of make me want to be the best version of me that I could be. And so, in that way, to answer your question, yeah, definitely. I think because I didn't realize it and I didn't believe in myself for so long, for so much of my youth anyway, I didn't really believe in myself. If you had told me you're on the hero's journey, um, or you're living a life in which you've got these elements of this type of journey, I would have gone, "Oh, you're crazy. You're crazy. There's no way in hell that, I'm gonna achieve these things. There's no way that I'm even worth anything to anyone or anything." And I probably wouldn't have even have said that to you. I probably would have just shut down. Um, and looking back on it now, I know for a fact that without the kinds of things that I experienced growing up, there's no way I'd be able to do the things that I love doing now, have the conversations I love having, help people the way I love doing. It was definitely the beginning of something crazy, crazy in a good way for me, definitely.
Okay. So you're now living in London in the UK.
Mm,
You said you've been there for a decade or so. Um, and it seems to me that you're in a good place now. but I guess
Mm.
that wasn't always the case, right? You have
Yeah.
your own podcast about that, right? Lost in Searching now.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So I suppose that'd be a good place to start then. When I was young, like you mentioned, I was born in Los Angeles in California, and my life growing up was a little bit strange because I was essentially born to two fairly hippie parents who, were very very chilled out people, and um, one day, it's it's a little bit strange because when I was maybe like 14 or 15, I actually asked my dad what happened the day that this story I'm about to tell you happened, and I can't remember if I like had a memory that unlocked or if I filled in the blanks using my own imagination. But essentially, one day when I was about two and a half, um, I was kind of, a little toddler walking around, and I was in the bathroom, um, just chilling the way a toddler does. And my mom was sitting there, kind of in front of the mirror doing her makeup. I think we were going to go out for the day or something like that. And all of a sudden, she freezes up and falls out of her chair onto the floor. And I start screaming and screaming. Um, my dad runs in and it's this whole crazy mess, and I'm a mess as a little toddler. I don't know what's going on. And it turned out that she had a brain tumor. And so this was the beginning of this radical change to my whole life, where without knowing it or expecting it, so many different consequences would come from this kind of original, this one shift, this one issue. And I think, to keep it brief and to the point, the main couple of issues that came from it, as well as the emotional difficulties for me as a person growing up, kind of dealing with that, eventually losing my mother to a second brain tumor. There was also the emotional and financial difficulties that came from my family not really being able to handle it. And when I say my family, really what I mean is my dad. My dad, sorry. He really struggled to deal with this situation. He didn't know how to raise a child on his own. He didn't really know how to be financially independent on his own, as well as supporting another person. And this led to all kinds of issues. Um, some of the stories that I think I tell most often, for example, are is one night where we had to essentially sleep rough. Um, in an old kind of abandoned apartment we used to live in, that was we were kicked out of it because we couldn't afford the rent anymore. But it was due to be demolished, so it wasn't actually, no one was actually living there, and we still had the key. So we had to kind of huddle up, sleeping in one of our old closets, using our jackets as blankets and things like that. And without realizing it, events like these, and the feelings of no one's here to help me, of I don't know where I'm going to be sleeping tonight, of what if someone comes and takes me away, because I'm pretty sure if social services had found us, I would have been taken away, right, from my family. I kind of grew up without realizing it. I had this subconscious belief that no one was there to help me, and if anything, I was a burden. And my most deep rooted paradigm became I don't matter and I am not good enough. And that became what I told myself almost every day as a teenager, probably up until, to be honest, probably up until I was 18 or 19, for a long time. So, from the age of 8 for a decade plus, that was my life. That was my belief in myself. Um, it caused all kinds of issues. Um, I would say the main one that stands out to me in reflection is this really intense kind of social anxiety. So, as you mentioned, eventually we moved to the UK, like I told you earlier. When I was about 12, we moved to live with the rest of my dad's side of the family here in the UK in London. And this was the start of more positive changes to my life because suddenly I had the space to focus on trying to build a life for myself. But I think I had so much unprocessed kind of BS from my childhood that I didn't know what to think of myself or what to do with myself, other than I don't believe in myself and I think I'm worthless, right? That paradigm I mentioned before. And so essentially it became this life of, I am afraid of everything and I don't want to put myself out there. So I had this really intense social anxiety, until I was, for about 4 years, until I was about 16. That is probably the longest phase of, I guess, what you'd call the doomer kind of part of my life. And as an aside, I love your whole description of doomer and bloomer, because we often in life seem to have these moments, these periods of doomer, these periods where everything feels doom and gloom. For me, those tend to be periods of depression, where everything feels a little bit more hopeless, and more low energy. But at that age of 16, I think I finally started to experience a little bit of bloomer as well. I something just snapped in my head, and I was like, I'm not okay with this. I don't
Yeah.
like that I'm in this position. This feels awful. And so what I started doing, was essentially taking opportunities as a young person, as a teenager, youth programs and standard things that pretty much any young person can do. But for me, because I had such intense anxiety at the time, it felt horrible, and I tried to run away from doing these things, drop out of these things, stop doing these things, and go back and hide in my room, as often as I could. But for some reason, I just kept going and kept forcing myself to do stuff that I hated. At the time, I hated the feeling. And eventually, it led to one learning after another, that, not to dwell on it too long right this second, but eventually led to me learning about entrepreneurship, becoming an entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur, caring about social entrepreneurship, caring about, youth and young people, and caring about other people's mental health. So, kind of, I guess if I had to boil down the things I care about into three areas, it's this idea of entrepreneurship, the, concept of good mental health, and kind of the passion of supporting young people, other young people. Um, so now at the age of almost 22 at the time of recording, I'm doing all these things that if you had told me at the age of 16 I'd be doing, um, and beliefs and successes, abilities, that if you had told me at the age of 16 I'd be doing or be able to do or be able to have, I would have looked at you like you're completely insane. But here I am living a life that I love a lot more. And you mentioned, my show Lost in Searching, and you're right, it's very much to kind of have these kinds of conversations, like how much can change no matter how lost you feel, how much can change. If you feel like you're searching for an answer, the answer's out there, and how much can change once you start trying to find it. So definitely for me, it was this huge journey, but those moments made me in a good way too, definitely.
So let me just try to construct a bit of a timeline here. So you were born in
Mm,
1999?
yes.
Okay. So you're just about, well, just about 10 years younger than I am. So, not to say that, you know, you sound like you've been through a lot for 22 years old.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so you basically say your mom's, by the time you were 2.5, 3, your mother was diagnosed with the brain tumor.
yeah,
You're still living in Los Angeles. This would have been like 2002-ish.
roughly, yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And then from there, like, how long did you live in Los Angeles before your dad and yourself, well, I guess it would have been your dad who made the decision
Mm,
ultimately, because you would have been too young.
yeah.
Um, so, like, was there a breaking point for your dad that was just like, we can't live this way anymore. Like, I can't put my son through this anymore.
Good
Like,
question.
have you had this conversation with your dad?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know it sounds like a strange one, right? It's like you must have had these kinds of conversations. I think unfortunately, my a big chunk of the impact that all of these experiences had on me ended well, I should say one of the biggest impacts was a huge lack of trust. And a lot of that came from my dad not being a very responsible person, which I would say exacerbated and sometimes even created some of these issues that we're talking about today, or that we haven't talked about, but that inevitably contribute. For me, family is always been a bit of a strange one because I've never had much of a family, and the family that I do have are either very, very supportive and I appreciate a lot, or are very unsupportive and are very difficult. And unfortunately, my dad is one of the latter. Um, and So there was never a conversation. I don't think he actually wanted to leave Los Angeles. I think he liked being there. But it was ultimately his mom, my grandmother, here in the UK, who said, "You can't live like this." And so the plan became, let move over here to London, let get out of that. We'll make sure that Seven, is able to be in a good education and blah blah blah, because the UK is more supportive when you're in difficult situations, and because he's from here, it was a move that he was able to make. And so I was brought here for that reason. But unfortunately, it wasn't really a conversation we could have, or that was easy to have, because it wasn't ever something I think he wanted to talk much about. It was something that I kind of had to learn a lot about for myself upon reflection. It wasn't something I could really be told like what was the case. I didn't get much of a conversation or a choice in the matter. And I definitely say that had some impacts on me, but unfortunately, no. To answer your question, no, we didn't really have a full conversation about it at any point. Yeah, it's a weird one.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, I would say sometimes like closure ends up
Mm,
being a big theme in people's lives.
yeah.
Like I don't know what sort of relationship or on what sort of terms you are with your father, but like um you're right, families are complicated.
Mm,
And I've often found that you've confined, like, just because you're blood related doesn't always necessarily mean that you're family. Like I have found that
mm,
you can find family outside of your blood relations, right?
yeah.
And I'm just wondering, you know, so you moved to the UK when you were what, 8 years old?
12.
12. So you've been
Yeah.
there just basically, like you said, a decade, uh,
Yeah.
trying to sort yourself out in a sense. Um,
Pretty much.
and, and I mean, I guess you're still like everyone. You're still a work in progress
Mm,
in a sense. Um,
mm,
and I'm just trying to um, kind of get a sense of where you were, where you are, and I guess where you're going. You know,
mm. That's a really,
are
yeah. That's a really good question.
right. Like
Yeah.
it's often until we know. Like I think I think you have a good sense of who you are.
Mm,
But where are you going now, Seven? Where, like, what's
mm,
your, at 22? I mean,
mm.
I can't even very, like, I can recall where I was at 22, but I don't
Yeah.
think I don't think I had a very good sense of my identity. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? So, like,
Yeah, no, I know
how,
exactly what you mean. Yeah. It's a bit of a strange conversation to have, knowing that to me it's my everyday life, and to someone else it's a totally new thing to understand what someone else's perspective is, right? So I'll try to take it from a step back and as clear of a perspective as I can. In terms of where I am, or sorry, where I was, where I am, and where I'm going, I I love that you've described that way because, and again, going back to this idea of the hero's journey, right? What I don't think we do enough is we don't it's not common for us to fully reflect on the past until we understand just how much of an impact it had on us, and then we want to understand that more. And so much of what kind of the conversation we've had so far and the kind of conversations I have all the time are like, where was I, but what can I learn from it, and where does that put me now? So in terms of kind of understanding my identity and where I am now, just before I answer your question, one thing I want to say there is like, I think we're always what I've noticed is that we always tend to be rediscovering a little bit about who we are now. um, I believe it's very important to understand like this is who I am now, and what does who I am even mean, right? And that was a question I had to wrestle with over the last few months. Actually, who am I, right? Um, but regardless, it's almost like it's this really kind of confusing question in a way because we want there to be a clear and simple answer. And I've heard all kinds of different people, different things in terms of who am I, and what should I be thinking about in terms of who I am. But in terms of my identity, one thing I've learned that's very important, which I think helps answer this question a little bit, is who I am in the present, although it was shaped by what happened in the past, I don't want it to be too attached to the past, right? It's just as it's common for us to not properly reflect on what we've experienced and what we can learn from it. I think it's very common for us to take certain elements of things that happen to us and attach ourselves to them, right? So I described like, my paradigm used to be I don't matter and I'm not good enough, and that's because I so closely attached myself to these things happened to me, people treated me this way, I felt this kind of way about myself. And it became this idea that I am those things. I am those failures. I am that difficult situation. I am the reason that my dad is annoyed or unhappy because he has to worry about a child or whatever. I am those things. That was my biggest, most deepest rooted kind of idea because I was so attached to all those things. So everything I just kind of told you, to me, that helps me learn the kinds of like learn about why I've done what I've done, why I care about the things I care about. But I also, as part of that whole kind of bloomer experience, if you will, to use your terminology, right? For me, it was very much to really bloom in this way, to overcome, to be more positive. I have to understand that these things, although they helped shape who I am today, they don't define who I get to choose to be every day. I am different to those things. Those things don't have to hold me back. And so to start, the reason I say that is to start answer your question, to start trying to answer your question of where am I going? I had to put my foot down and go, in the same way that I'm not happy with where I was, but I know it doesn't define me. What do I want to create that I know I will be happy with, that really speaks to who I am, who I definitely am today? Um, so for me, like I said, a lot of what I love is to do with either entrepreneurship, mental health, or sometimes youth related things. And what I essentially work on, everything I work on now, projects and the business that I mentioned a few minutes ago, all of it is underneath my business group, which is called the Discover Humanity Group. And in short, what Discover Humanity exists to do is level the playing field. So even when it comes to my podcast, Lost in Searching, it exists to level the playing field for someone in some way. And in that case, it is young leaders primarily. That might be entrepreneurs like myself or something else, I want to level the playing field a little bit as far as their mental health is concerned. You can be amazing. You can achieve the things that, despite at a young age, you're trying to achieve. Um, and if it weighs on you or you struggle with your mental health as a result, you're not alone. Things can get better. You can get through the hard times. You can learn. You can be amazing. Um, and in that way, I want everyone who listens to that show to understand they can be those things, regardless of who you are. Understanding, coping, and growing through your mental health is more than just possible, it is plausible and powerful. And that essentially defines everything that I want to do. Now, primarily, I'd call myself an entrepreneur. So all of these kinds of things, they're kind of harnessed through businesses. So, leveling the playing field for people who want to become entrepreneurs, that's my other business that I'm currently working on. And I've got loads of other businesses that I want to work on or I've helped work on in the past, that are leveling the playing field for another group of people. So, for me, a lot of it comes back to, regardless of the shit that you've been through, let's understand and work together to create some kind of way forward for you, right? We can level the playing field for you. You have opportunity, you have ability. Let's harness it, let's make it come out. And in a way, again, it comes back to the whole bloomer side of what you talk about, right? There is that beauty and that possibility on the other side. Let's make it happen. For whatever that group of people is. So that's very much what's in my future, is is helping level the playing field for the groups of people I know I can support.
Awesome. Um, I was just gonna say, entrepreneurship. I mean, it's fairly broad, and
Mm,
when you say social entrepreneurship, I guess you're talking
mm.
about the Discover Humanity group. Is that what you're?
A little
You know,
bit. So,
how would you define the social
mm,
entrepreneurship?
I see. I love that question so much. I could talk about it forever and ever, but I guess the best place to start, I think, would be with actually a little bit of a story. So, when I was 18, I went through that classic kind of 18-year-old thing of, well, I'm an adult now. What do I want to do with my life? And before going back into university, what I did for a year is took a year out to do various different things, take various different opportunities. And one of the things I did was actually go and live in a village in Nepal for 3 months. So, a really rural mountaintop village in a developing country. And because of some of the opportunities that I was had already taken as a young people and the charities that I supported, I was given this book called We Economy. And anyone interested in any of the stuff we're talking about, around entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, I would recommend that book definitely. We Economy. But what it essentially did for me was outline a different way of doing business, and it introduced the concept of social entrepreneurship to me. And this became a core kind of, um, almost like purpose for me, where, because I was at the stage of my life where I was like, I don't know what I want to do next, and I was in a space where I was closed off from a lot of the normal world, but at the same time, I was in this mountaintop village with these beautiful views and kind of reduced back to a more simple way of living life. All of these factors kind of converged and really brought out, oh my God, this is what social entrepreneurship is making me feel, and became this purpose for me. So, to answer your question, what is social entrepreneurship mean, and especially more specifically, what does it mean to me? Social entrepreneurship, um a lot of people think is about kind of not being like a non-profit type of enterprise, a non-profit type of startup or something like that. To me, it's not to do anything to do with your business structure. To me, a social enterprise is anything that any um, startup, and even if it's not a startup, if something can be socially entrepreneurial. So that could even be a project that isn't fully a business, right? That's socially entrepreneurial. This would be anything that can sustainably support or help improve the lives of people in a certain way. which makes it in a way really broad, but actually when you break it down leaves so much room for creativity. And this is something I love to stress within entrepreneurship, because I think when we're growing up, um, especially nowadays in schools, specifically, creativity is this thing that's almost pushed to the side. Creativity isn't seen as that important, and actually, creativity is what changes the world. And with social entrepreneurship, that is so incredibly true, because if you can find a way to have a business that runs itself, right, whether it's by making profit by selling a certain type of product or whatever, and in doing that, every single part of your systems, um, and every single part of your business aims to do a good thing in a certain way, then actually you're able to make the world a better place sustainably, right? So an example that I love of a social enterprise, which is actually a really big business, is a shoe brand, a footwear brand called Tom's. Tom's is international. I don't know what their presence is like in Canada, but in the US and UK, they're fairly prominent. And essentially, what they do is, 1/3 of all the profit that they make goes towards good causes, essentially gets donated to good causes. And in the process of creating their products, they also find ways of improving lives in all sorts of ways, whether it's sustainable sourcing or, um, kind of creating jobs in certain locations and things like that. They've really weaved social positive benefit into every aspect of their business, everything from creating the product to the profit they make after they've got the product. And because it's a sustainable business model first, that can keep going and they can keep helping people like that indefinitely as long as the business is going, right? So it's a sustainable way of helping people. Um, and when I was in, that mountaintop village, um, kind of wondering what should I do next with my life, knowing I wanted to help people, knowing I wanted to change my own life because of the circumstances I had grown up in, and didn't want to ever experience those again. I was like, how can I do this? How can I make my life better? Which primarily means, financially and emotionally, right? Those are probably the two main areas, if I'm being honest, and make other people's lives better. And at the time, I was just like, there isn't one. Before learning about social entrepreneurship, I kind of thought I have to have a job where I'm helping people, um, because otherwise I won't be satisfied with my purpose in life. But that's probably not going to pay me very well, so I'm probably just going to have to deal with not making much money or changing my life very much. That and I didn't see any other option. I might go into politics. I might go into working for, a charity or NGO of some kind or whatever, but I didn't see something that really spoke to me. And then when I learned about social entrepreneurship, it was like my mind just expanded. Um, Suddenly there was so much more opportunity for me. And when I got back home after a few months of being there, I started to explore this concept more, lots of self study, uh, being an entrepreneur in various different ways and learning from those failures. And that really has defined my career in entrepreneurship. How do I make the world a better place through doing what I love doing? So yeah, that's pretty much that.
So you mentioned failures. So what
Mm,
sort of I mean, what sort of setbacks have you had? I mean, 18, that was 4 years ago.
mm,
So you made a
yeah,
conscious decision at 18 is, hey, I've decided. I mean, I wish I had had your your insight at 18, because in my world, um like I come from a small town, northern British
yeah,
Columbia. Um the options are go get a trade, go to work. You don't
mm,
you're not really you're not really exposed to anything else.
yeah,
Luckily for me, I was open-minded enough that I kind of expanded in my early 20s to go do things like the Katimavik program, which is similar to like the Peace Corps in the United States,
okay,
like a
okay,
volunteering program. Um, And it sounds like you kind of had the similar experience with
Mm,
your trek to Nepal. I'm not sure what organization you were part of, but often these can become catalysts to open your mind to the possibilities of new experiences, right? So you made
yeah.
a conscious decision at 18 is like this is the way I want to live my life, and this is how I want to
Mm,
provide service. But just because you decide to do something doesn't mean there won't necessarily be some setbacks or failures in between. So have you
yeah.
had some failures or have you had some
100%.
successes? Like, would you talk about your
Yeah.
successes and failures a little bit between then and
Yeah.
now?
Yeah, I think I should caveat everything I'm about to say with the idea that we have. I say we. Obviously, as a generalization. Speaking for myself, I definitely have failures on a daily basis because failures, and these aren't bad, totally horrible things, but failures often end up being I haven't been who I want to be or succeeded at creating what I want to create, or learned what I want to learn. So we set ourselves, even if we do this totally subconsciously, often we set ourselves little goals and how I achieved what I've achieved. For me, I feel like I fail in a good way on an almost daily basis, because I try my best to practice being a certain type of positive person. And something goes wrong in a day, and I get really angry at the fact that's gone wrong, right? Like recently, I had to call a plumber because one of our pipes burst. And I was like, oh, this is gonna really hamper my day and blah 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 blah. And I got really angry. And to me, that was a little failure because I would have much rather I was the kind of person who could take it on the chin, take a deep breath, accept it for what it was, and not be so negatively impacted by it, right? One of my favorite kind of concepts is that um, you can't control the ocean, but you can learn to ride the waves, right? You can't control what life throws at you, but you can choose how to react. And that's something I try to live on a daily basis. And so I try to set myself relevant kind of goals. If that doesn't happen, I treat that as a little mini failure. But in the exact same vein as what I just described, I don't get I don't believe in getting super annoyed at ourselves based on those failures, because in the same way that we had to reflect, that I described earlier, needing to reflect on my life growing up to understand what made me the kind of person I am today. Um, Reflecting on those failures ends up being the best learning experiences we can have. So to start to answer your question, and I'm going to start with that idea of like learning, right? I've had more failures than I can remember, and the reason I say that is not as a kind of throwaway cliche. Once in a while, I remember things I did as a young person that were actually kind of entrepreneurial, and they failed, or I gave up at doing them, and was like, oh, I totally forgot that I did that thing and failed at it. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, like a memory unlocked from when I was like 13 or 7 years old or whatever. Um, those failures ended up being the or actually, okay, let me in fact start with what they were. That'll make a little more sense. So I think there are a couple of things I would definitely call bigger, kind of more prominent failures in my life, as far as projects I've worked on have gone, or have been, I should say. So the most prominent that sticks out to me is something I worked on while I was at university. So this is a different conversation, but I was only at university for 1 year because I basically dropped out to pursue entrepreneurship. Um, but while I was there, I tried helping build a startup that would essentially provide better access, and communication between rough sleepers and people who wanted to donate to them. So we had designed technology and an app and a system, and we had partnerships in place and all kinds of things that would allow people to donate to trustworthy rough sleepers who really did need their money for a place to stay that night, or other products that they might need, like sanitation products and things like that. Because of my life growing up, that, as I've already explained, homelessness was very important to me. So helping
So
that group of people was
when you
important to
say
me.
when you say rough sleeper,
Mm.
is that a UK term for a homeless
That
person?
might that might be a UK term, but there is a key difference between rough sleeper and homeless. Someone who's homeless might be couch surfing, for example. So homelessness covers a lot more things. When we were homeless, when we were homeless when I was a kid, 99% of the time we stayed on a friend's couch for the night, for example. So we were homeless, but we technically had a roof over our heads. Rough sleeper is someone who is basically on the streets. So rough sleeper is a specific part of homelessness that is specific to people who cannot or do not have anywhere to go for the night, who basically end up being on the streets on their own. Yeah. Um, and that, so in the words, is the worst part of homelessness. And that, to me, because of what I experienced, was horrific, and I wanted to do something about it. But despite all our partnerships and our efforts, it never took off. We weren't really able to build our product. We weren't really able to get the funding we needed for it. We struggled to put in place a long-term vision or a plan to achieve that vision. Um, so we really had this we had this really hard time making it happen, and eventually I left the place where I was going to university to come back to London, because I wasn't in London where I moved off to. um, and as a result of that, basically quit the team. And after I left, one person after another just quit and moved on to other things, and so it petered out. And that's probably the biggest failure that kind of hits closest to heart, to home, I should say, because it was about something I cared so much about, that had a lot going for it, but ultimately failed. However, I do still want to reignite it one day, and I don't think it almost doesn't, from a purely startup, business entrepreneurship type of viewpoint, it almost doesn't matter too much that it didn't pan out, because we I mean, I can't speak for everyone else, but I know that we together learned a lot, and I took so much from that in terms of what does leadership over this type of project need to look like. And it's at that point that I was able to start reflecting back to some of the stuff I mentioned earlier that I ended up failing at as even a young person who knew nothing about these types of things, right? So when I was, I think, 13, I tried to get into making YouTube videos, and they were really awful quality, at least in part, if not completely, because I was so young and probably unable to make content that was really valuable. Um, However, and so that failed. And I tried doing that 2 or 3 times, and that failed. When I was a little kid, I tried making a lemonade stand, which is really common in the US, but I tried it and did it for a few days and then just stopped trying and just left it. So I started remembering all these times that I've tried something and given up. And I guess to answer the second part of your question around, like, where did the successes part come in? Um, well, where does the success part come in, I should say? It was, again, upon reflection of those things, I realized, actually, what did I learn? Right. So, a number one, I suppose, would be like, I didn't I might have given up on each idea at the time, but I didn't give up on doing something, right? So I gave up on making those YouTube videos when I was 13, or gave up on launching this app when I was 19, but I didn't give up on helping rough sleepers. I didn't give up on putting myself out there or creating content that's valuable for people. So I learned, in a way, one of my biggest learnings from these failures was, how do I shift my perspective to really understand what has actually happened, and therefore what can happen next time, instead of looking down on myself. And the reason that's important, I stress that so much, is because of those paradigms I had growing up, which for all of this time that I've described these failures, very much was still that paradigm I described earlier of I don't matter and I am not good enough, right? Um, so I kind of kept almost throwing myself at a brick wall, or at least it felt like I was, but I was just so determined to break that wall down. Um, and I just kept kind of learning from them and learning from them. And what it led to, as far as the successes are concerned, are today, I think I understand both myself and what success looks like to me so well, like almost to this like such a micro little level, where I can look at each uh almost each little detail, understand, is this right for me? Does this serve me? Is this part of what will make this successful for me, and how it's going to work? And I can just see it so clearly when it's something that I'm passionate about and I care about. And I don't think that would have been possible if I hadn't A, failed loads at lots of different things, and then B, reflected on them, spent a lot of time really deeply reflecting on them to try to make them better next time, or to be better next time. And it kind of, as a final thought, it kind of comes back to this idea of like, what does a question that's really important for me is, what does education look like for us as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as people with our own projects? For you, someone with a podcast like this, what does education look like for us? The reason my podcast is called Lost and Searching is because often we're lost looking for the answer to that. But it's in these failures, right? These failures often come from things we do because we're searching. And it's in these failures that we often find the education, we find the answers. You mentioned like the insights and things that I seem to have at a what objectively seems like a young age. And to me, it's just kind of like I've I just wanted to learn the things I wanted to learn, and I learned it through the things that I failed to do, or that I didn't do right, or that I wasn't happy with. Thought about it, thought about why, tried again next time at something, and and that's what so much of my education has been. It hasn't been from school. It wasn't from my 1 year at university. It wasn't from any coaching or mentoring that I had, because I haven't really had much of that either. It was from throwing myself at the brick wall and realizing, why wasn't it breaking down, right? That was pretty much it.
So it sounds like to me, like you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how that
I
pyramid
am,
of
yeah.
needs works. So it
Mm,
seems to me that the reason that you know, and this is a social thought or experiment that I've thought about a lot, is like what would
mm,
happen if you raised everyone up one collective level.
mm.
If you
Right.
raised everyone up above food, shelter, and security, so if we didn't have such things as poverty, um, homelessness,
Mm,
and general lack of security, if we could raise collectively the whole
mhm,
vibration of the world one collective level, what sort of
mm,
society would we construct? And it sounds like this is something that you're very through your social entrepreneurship. This is something that you're
mm.
trying to solve. Um, so
Interesting.
it's
Mm,
it seems to me like it's not something that like I don't think just throwing money at something is going to solve that problem. Um,
mm,
but I think giving the tools and the resources to people to basically build a life that they're proud of. it could be a start. I mean, you started out in Nepal,
Mm,
and now you live in the UK, or not, well, not started out in Nepal, but that's where you kind of had that spark or whatever you want to call it.
yeah.
Um, and the question I have for you is, like, you see you didn't have any mentorships per se, but
Mm,
have there been people that have been influential to you that have
mm,
maybe helped you along the path? Would you
yeah.
speak to that a little bit?
Interesting. Definitely. So, I mean, it's really it's a bit of a strange one for me because I talk about how important I think mentorship is, and I talk about that like a decent amount, despite never having had a mentor before. But I would definitely say I've had peers, or people who are much more experienced than me who have mentored me in certain areas. I think it's interesting to kind of take a slightly different perspective on what where that learning can come from. So for me, I think I'd say I'd give three main people. Number one, would is a friend of mine from school actually, and I started telling the story a lot, and I love it a lot. Where as a young person, as a younger teenager, maybe 14, 15 years old, as a result of some of the stuff I described, I had a lot of anger within me. So when because of the social anxiety I had, I almost never left home. But when I did, it was just for school. And when I was at school, I was angry at everything. So I was anxious at home and angry at school, and my anger was taken out on all kinds of things, systems, the school systems, government systems, things I thought didn't work to serve people or made people's lives worse or whatever. um but this anger was almost overwhelming. Like, it was to the point where people knew I was unhappy, I was depressed, I wasn't getting any, I wasn't doing anything. And a friend of mine was really, really worried about me, but he felt like he couldn't get through to me, and we had one moment where he finally did. We were leaving our kind of lunch period. The bell rang. We're going to go off to class. I was the last person to leave. He was the second to last person to leave. He gets to the door. He opens the door. He turns around and looks at me. And he goes, Seven, if you can't help yourself, how are you ever going to help anybody else? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, something finally got through to me, and it hit me so hard because he was right. I wasn't helping myself. I needed so much help and support. Um, I got used to living a life where I felt like I needed to do everything for myself and need be very independent. And actually, I needed a lot of help, both to work on myself and to have other people help me work on myself. Um, and I didn't end up getting much of that help from other people, but when I did, I took it so kind of I took it so much. I put so much weight on it in a good way, right? I learned a lot from it. um, I would say that is a really I would call that mentorship in a way, that experience of him finally getting through to me and saying what he said and changing my perspective so much. So I would say that as a number one, because it ended up changing so much of what I believe and the perspectives that I had, in so many ways, and for my whole life since. A number two, I would say, is that as a result of a lot of the opportunities I started taking and positions I was putting myself in, I met a young man my age, who had a business from a fairly young age. When we were 18, he asked me to come on and work with him on a project he was delivering for a client. And this was only a few months before I left to go to Nepal, actually. And this is what introduced me to entrepreneurship. So I got introduced to entrepreneurship, worked on an entrepreneurial project for a real client, got paid for it, all these things. Then took away this book where I learned more about a specific part of entrepreneurship. Um, so this process kind of made sense to me in my head, and that's where the buildup was. And I would definitely call him a sort of peer mentor, in the sense that he was the same age as me, but he had loads of other mentors and coaches and had put himself out there in a lot of ways, and he saw this potential in me, decided, let's work together, And in doing so, I learned an insane amount about both in terms of personal development as well as in terms of entrepreneurship, and have done for years. And he's a business partner and close friend of mine now. And we've been working together for years. A young man named Jeremiah um, had a huge impact on my life. So that's a number two. And both of these examples have been peers. I'd probably say a number three is someone who isn't a peer as much as he is a mentor and coach, who's a lot older than I am. A man named Remy. He is one of these entrepreneurs who's built and sold multiple businesses for a high multiple of like 10 mil and things like that. And he's now a coach and all kinds of amazing things. And he's great at what he does. And he, I would say, as a kind of a coach and kind of a mentor, but not so officially, I suppose. He's walked through a lot of things with me around my kind of inner demons, my saboteur, my perspectives that I've talked about, right? Um, my ability to accept certain things that I've talked about. That helped change my perspective on myself and my own abilities. And so it's kind of funny because all these stories, they connect to certain parts of things that I didn't think were possible for myself, perspectives I had about myself that all needed to shift for me to be able to achieve anything, for me to put the right effort in, for me to feel the ways I want to feel. All of these stories took me from a very dark place, or from, I should say, from different types of dark places at different points of my life, to a little bit of more kind of open, lighter, freer, more understanding places in those various periods of my life. And of course, they all kind of stacked together as well to kind of create the progress that I was kind of creating. If that kind of helps answer your question. So there's been a few people, funny enough, most of them have been peers, but definitely, but it is a strange one because I've never had anyone say to me, I really believe in you, so I want to be your mentor. I've never had that. And I've had to learn a lot of this stuff on my own. I've had to push myself a lot. I've had to do a lot of self learning. That's why when I talked about failure, I was kind of saying like a lot of the education in my life has been from my own failures and my reflections on them, because I didn't learn them at school. I didn't learn them from mentors. I didn't learn them from university. I had to learn them from myself. Um, and that's, if anything, that's where some of the idea of my podcast name, Lost and Searching, actually came from, because I felt so long feeling I've spent so long feeling so lost. And I'm searching all the time for learnings and answers and growth, you know?
Yeah, I definitely can feel what you're talking about. I mean, I went through a similar thing in my 20s, and it
Mm,
just sounds like you've kind of accelerated it in a 16 to 22 year old period, which is,
yeah,
it's great. It's like everyone has their own path to walk, right? And
yeah, yeah. But
it's not a destination, it's a
it,
journey. So
yeah, exactly. But that, because it's a journey, it's almost like it's not just that it's a journey and not a destination. It's also that it's a journey that might not have a destination, right? That journey keeps going. So,
mm,
by no means do I feel like, yes, I've achieved this. Like, it's not there aren't any boxes to tick here. To me, it's almost like this is just who I am, and I'm just gonna keep going and keep learning as much as possible. Um, that's why I always maintain that there is no age that is too young or too old to make a difference, to change your life, to start a business. To me, I think age is something we put way too much weight on in our society. And actually, wisdom does not come with age. Wisdom comes with experience. And you can spend a lot of your life not gaining any experience. And a lot of that might just come down to that reflection. I keep throwing the word reflection around, but to me, the space and the ability to reflect is what I think has been so life changing. And actually, I'm really interested to hear from you. You mentioned this kind of social experiment of like, what would life be like if we covered all these basic needs. Um, And I'm really interested to kind of hear what your kind of thoughts or conversations and things like that have been about that, because I've heard a lot about Maslow's hierarchy, but I've never heard of that kind of thought experiment before. I'd love to know more about like what does that look like? What thoughts or paths does that has that taken you down thinking about that?
Well, I ultimately believe that the resources on this planet are more than enough, and
Yeah.
we actually live in an abundant planet that has more than enough resources for everyone on the planet, all of the different continents, all of the different races, religions, creeds, and backgrounds. The problem that I see is that we're not allocating those resources properly.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a great amount of wealth concentrated in a very small amount of the population, and it's not about helping the common man reach our our common collective potential.
Mm.
So if we focused on raising like the 99% of the population up to the highest potential possible, if
Mm.
everybody, yourself included, myself included, was taught from the age of 0 years old or 5 years old or whatever, that
Yeah.
you can do or be whatever you want to be. And here are the resources and the tools and the support structure available to become
Mm.
the best artist, the best builder, the whatever the thing that sparks you to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
If we were all taught, and if we were all given uh, the time, the tools, the resources, and the proper
Mm.
family or community structures available to us, could we achieve what I call a tier one society, meaning that we're living from the most sustainable resources possible. We're not needlessly burning fossil fuels or living
Yeah.
beyond our means.
Yeah.
We're harnessing sustainable energy, whether that's solar, wind, hydro, uh, let it be methane. There's always going to be a place for hydrocarbons. But if we were building societies and cities and communities and families and individuals to live at their highest potential possible, there would be no famine, there would be no wars. What
Mm.
need would there be a war? Because if you already have the resources available and the access to clean water and food and all of these things that come from
Yeah.
scarcity, there's no reason to have discord,
Mm.
because we're all living collectively to a common goal. Um, I call it the Star Trek future,
Right.
where we're not we're not just our the sum of our nations.
Yeah.
We don't call ourselves Canadians, or we don't call ourselves Britons or Americans. We're Earth. We're part of the
Human.
planet, and we're
Yeah.
humans. We live collectively to try and come in balance
Mm.
with nature. And if we were living from that place, um, I don't think that we would have the discordance or the manifestations of um, strife that we see on this planet, because everybody collectively would be raised up individually, um, to live from a place of harmony and cohesion. Um, and I think that perhaps social entrepreneurship has a place to play there.
Mm.
Because right now, the way that the corporations and the structures and the governments are built, it's built on a scarce set of a mindset of scarcity.
Yeah.
And if we could get rid of scarcity and realize that we really are in an abundance of time, money, resources,
Mm.
people, all those things, I think we could get to a society that is basically what I call God consciousness or pure love consciousness.
Okay.
Um, and I'm not trying to be hippy dippy, but I think that
I get what
I
you
think that
mean.
it's
Yeah.
I think that it's possible in our lifetime to
Mm,
achieve this if we
yeah.
just had a if we had a leadership that was not about 4-year election cycles or
Yeah.
um, standing on the backs of other people to get where we need to be. Um,
Mm. Ultimately, ultimately, we are all one, right? All humanity, all of us are so interconnected. All of us are just made up of matter. All of us are part of a collective, and we see ourselves. Something someone said to me on, actually, funny enough, on one of the episodes of my podcast not too long ago. At the time of recording, wasn't recorded too long ago. Um, is that we overcomplicate things a lot. And I didn't realize until she said that to me, like, just how much that's the case. I think because of this something about the way the human brain works, we put so much weight into so many little details that ultimately don't matter that much. So we divide ourselves. We think of really complex systems, um, and eventually those systems almost become stronger than we are. But if at the end of the day, we're really in tune with this idea that we are all one kind of collective, all of us are more similar than we will ever be different, right? I have a very clear memory of I think I was in maybe ninth grade. I think is what it would translate to is ninth grade. Um, and my English teacher was talking to us about dichotomies, the idea of dichotomies. And a dichotomy is essentially when someone constructs something as either one thing or the other. So it's binary. Either you are this or you are that. Um, and to kind of deconstruct this idea, he gave us the example of a man and a woman. So he said, "What is the opposite of a man?" And everyone went, "A woman." And he went, "See, but that's really strange because there is nothing more similar to a human man than a human woman, and vice versa. There's nothing more similar on this planet." And
yeah,
that's just something just clicked in my brain where I was like, why do we divide ourselves so much on things that at the end of the day are almost irrelevant details. Like they're relevant to really specific contexts, and that's about it. At the end of the day, our individuality matters a lot for certain elements of our life. But beyond that, we're not nearly as individual as we think we are. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a we are united. We are part of a collective. We are part of a much greater whole. So why do we put so much negativity out into the world? Um, and to me kind of when it comes back to, you know, you talked about scarcity and abundance. That was early on in my career I learned about scarcity and abundance and the scarcity and abundance mindsets, and to me I was just like, wow, this speaks to me so much, because it was insane to me how familiar it sounded to me, especially with the people I had in my life growing up, and particularly my father. Funny enough, to almost hear the voice of what someone with a scarcity mindset would sound like. um I can't succeed because someone else has succeeded. I can't do well because someone else has done well. I can't do well because someone else doesn't want me to do well. All these negative thoughts, and actually funny enough, those thoughts stop you from doing it. They cause you to put more negativity out into the world. And it just, generally speaking, creates this really awful air and energy about things. And actually that shift in mindset allows you to understand just how connected we are, just how much how whole we are. One of my favorite sayings, which I think inevitably comes out of things like therapy, but I love it nonetheless, is like, no one is broken. No one needs to be fixed. We can be helped, we can improve, we can grow, but we aren't broken. We are whole. Everyone is whole. Um, we put so much weight on the negative and the details, and I think it just holds us back so much. So when you talk about that kind of ideal life, um, I definitely think there are so many ways of us playing a part in making that happen. One of the reasons I kind of stuck with social entrepreneurship when I learned about it is because another social entrepreneur who I spoke to a little bit gave me the example of um, water, right? So, sounds like a weird thing to say, but if we think about the way water and specifically water scarcity works in developing countries or and areas of developing countries where water is a difficult resource to come by, or clean water, I should say. So places in villages in various parts of the world where people will need to walk for an hour, fill up huge buckets of water, which might not even be clean, carry all kinds of diseases and things like that, and then carry that back, and that's their whole day spent. For every $1 that we invest into clean, sustainable water for other people who don't have it, for example, in villages like those kinds, the ones we see on TV and things like that, um, for every $1 we invest, the return on investment is anywhere from $3 to $30. Imagine a 30 times return on your investment. That's insane. Now, obviously, that's a little bit complex in the sense of like how is it broken down and how is it returned, but the point is that the world is able to improve once you start having those fundamental resources, right? That's the first thing I thought when you started describing that to me a minute ago. Was I was like, this is how much the world can improve once you start doing really simple things to improve and kind of bring up to level the playing field in a way, to use the language I used earlier, to level the playing field of what we have access to. This is how much we can achieve. So there's all
I
kinds of
call it
ways we can contribute to it,
call it
but
raising the, I call it raising the 99% is another way
mm,
of
yeah,
looking at it,
yeah,
right?
I love that. I love that.
In that vein,
Mm,
how do you think one can be of service to their community and the world,
mm,
and start getting on that path to becoming from a doomer to a bloomer? Seven.
yeah. Well, I think this is going to sound like a bit of a cop out answer, but I think my answer is almost irrelevant because everyone's going to have a little bit of a different context. If you have a context like I had, and what I've said so far today resonates with you, um, then for me it was about, I suppose, two main things. Shoving myself out there, right? Pushing myself in front of opportunities or even creating opportunities as much as I could to come out of my comfort zone so that I could learn the things I wasn't otherwise able to learn. And number two is to practice the skill of self introspection, which essentially means to reflect on what you did, the role that you had to play, and what that kind of had to do with things, so that you can learn for next time. And just keep repeating the process and learning as much as you can. And if it feels hard and you're kind of, things aren't the way you want them to be, or whatever else, um, definitely keep in mind that, again, it's that journey. If it's difficult, please find help doing it because there are people out there who want to listen to you, definitely. But they're, as difficult of a journey as it is, I promise you, if it's about something you care about and you care about that growth, it is worth it. And if it's beyond the kind of example of the stuff that I've given you today, and you're in a different position, a different context in your life, it is first and foremost to understand that context. Because I think it's very easy for us to give blanket advice to everyone. And actually, if someone's in a different context to you, a different life circumstance, and that whatever you're going through doesn't work for them, it just sounds like you're telling people what to do. And actually, the most important thing of all is to understand yourself as an individual with your own needs, learn about that, and act upon that first and foremost, because only you are in your own head. No one else. People can help you, but only you can choose to change yourself because only you are in your own head. So it's learning about yourself first and foremost, I think, would be my advice.
And is there any question that I haven't asked you that you would ask yourself so far?
Hmm. Good question. I think for me, it's always important to understand the mental health aspect of the kind of difficult situations we've been through, right? And I I would say the only thing that I would probably ask myself is how did it feel feeling so lost, I suppose. That kind of mental health related question, I guess to answer it very briefly for you, is it felt lonely. It felt real lonely. And one of the things I've learned more than anything is that things like therapy definitely are important and they have a place, but actually one of the reasons we feel so lonely is just because our society has gotten horrible at listening. We're awful at just actually caring about someone else and really empathetically listening. I try my best to practice listening as much as I can, and I would encourage everyone listening to practice listening to other people in their lives as much as possible, because that loneliness, it is horrific, but it's also uh, avoidable. It is improvable, if that's a word, right? Um, Feeling lost is, I think, becoming incredibly common. If it wasn't already, it's becoming even more common, but we can do something about it. Definitely.
Okay. Second to last, I always ask this
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your zombie plan? If the world comes to an end, where are you gonna go? What you gonna do?
Good question. I think I try to find the people that I love and create some kind of action plan to survive, probably as much as possible. And if it's all doom and gloom and I'm somehow the last person left alive, I have no idea what I'd do. I'd maybe find a way to travel to like somewhere in East Asia where there were like temples and monks and live as a solitary monk until I die of natural causes if I survive that long. That sounds like the most peaceful way to live, but loneliness is probably the only flaw with that. Is very Loneliness is very anti-human, which is why I say first and foremost find the people I love and form a group with them to survive through that.
Nice. And the best place for listeners to connect with you
Mm,
online for your social handles,
yeah. Yeah, 100%.
learn more
I would say
about
that
your product.
the main yeah, my podcast as well. The main two things I'd say, so number 1, Instagram. Instagram is the only really, you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to, but Instagram is the only real platform that I use. My handle is just at 7.jacob, same as my name. Um I try my best to turn my Instagram into a bit of a resources place for people interested in the same kind of stuff. And number 2, my podcast is called Lost and Searching, and you can find that anywhere you find your podcasts and on YouTube. So just search in Lost and Searching podcast, and you'll find it.
Awesome. Well, Seven, thank you for sharing your story. And I just want to say, like, for 22 years old, I mean, like you said, age isn't really a thing, but you're very insightful, uh, and
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. I appreciated listening to your story and learning more about who you are and where you're going. And I'm going to, keep following your journey,
Thank you.
on the path. So, and that's, what this is all about, right? And as I
Yeah.
always say, sharing is caring. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. If you're out there
Thank you.
listening to
Thank you
this,
so much for letting me share. And I loved being here. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. As always, you can reach us, the Doomer Bloomer podcast, at the Doomer Bloomer podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We're building a community of like-minded individuals like Steven. We have the Discord group, um, and various resources out there available. Do not hesitate to reach out wherever you are in the world if you're having struggles or need a little bit of extra support. If you enjoyed this content with Steven today and you would like to learn more about social entrepreneurship, please go to his Lost in Searching podcast. Reach out to him on Instagram and he'll be more than happy to help. Uh, if you are listening to this podcast and have been a long time listener, follower, you know that we're trying to build a community of like minded doomer bloomers in the world. Um, we have the Instagram page, Twitter, and Facebook, not to mention a Patreon, 3 different subscriber levels. Uh, if you need extra help or coaching, I'm available. Um, and in the Discord group, that's where we have some resources if you want to start your own podcast, um, or build out your social media. So, wherever you are in the world, have a great and prosperous day. The hashtag for this week is social proof. Have a great and prosperous day.